Back when I was a junior in high school, life was a whirlwind. I was involved in everything, advanced classes, varsity sports, you name it. Staying busy was my way of coping, an escape from the chaos that had taken over my family life. My parents had recently split and my older brother had just left for college. It was just me and my younger brother Ethan left at home. Ethan was a lot like me, smart, athletic, but the stress of our situation had driven a wedge between us. We rarely saw eye to eye. One cold, wet winter day in the Midwest, after another long day of school and swim practice, I finally got home, exhausted. I dropped my swim bag by the door and glanced around the house. It was empty. No surprise there. Dad was probably out with Ethan at his swim practice. His club team practiced right after hours, so I had the house to myself, which was fine by me. I popped a handful of Cheez-Its into my mouth and headed down to the basement to what I called my office. Our house was a typical middle-class two-story with an unfinished basement, except for one small room that had been converted into an office when my dad used to work from home. Now, it was my space, where I could get lost in schoolwork and drown out everything else. I flicked on the dim light and settled into the chair in front of the computer. I had a tedious essay to write for an advanced class, a topic I wasn't particularly interested in, but I needed to get it done. I started typing. The only sound in the room was the clacking of the keyboard. I was deep in thought, trying to pull together some coherent ideas about hedonism and the picture of Dorian Gray. I was so focused that I almost missed it. The sound of a voice, faint and distant. Logan. Logan, come up. My fingers froze over the keyboard. It was Ethan's voice, no doubt about it, but something felt off. I hadn't heard him come home and I hadn't seen the car in the driveway. My heart started to race. Ethan? I called back, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm busy. What do you need? There was no answer, just the quiet hum of the basement. I waited, ears straining for any sound, but nothing came. I shook my head, trying to refocus on my essay, but the unease lingered. Why would Ethan be home early, and why hadn't I heard him come in? I pushed the thought aside and got back to work, but then I heard it again, clearer this time. Logan, Logan, come up. The voice echoed through the basement, sending a shiver down my spine. My mind raced. Ethan was supposed to be at practice, so why was he calling me from upstairs? I stood up, a knot of anxiety tightening in my chest. Maybe something was wrong. Maybe he needed help. The last thing I wanted was to ignore him and regret it later. I made my way to the basement stairs, hesitating at the bottom as I peered up into the darkness of the house. Ethan, what's going on? I called out, but only silence greeted me. The house was unnervingly quiet. I tried to convince myself that it was nothing, that I was just hearing things. But something about that voice, so familiar, yet so wrong, compelled me to go upstairs and check. I took a deep breath and started climbing the stairs, my heart pounding with each step. When I reached the main floor, I glanced around, looking for any sign that Ethan was home. But there was nothing. No shoes, no backpack, no car in the driveway. The house was as empty as it had been when I arrived. Just as I was about to turn back, I heard the voice again, this time from upstairs, from the darkened second floor. Logan, Logan, come up. I froze. The voice wasn't calling out in the playful tone Ethan usually used. It was calm, almost too calm, and it sent a chill down my spine. Could it be a prank? But who would be here? The voice was so real, so convincing, that I felt compelled to go up and see for myself. Against my better judgment, I began to climb the stairs to the second floor, my heart racing. The darkness seemed to press in on me and every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but I couldn't stop. I had to know what was going on. I was halfway up the stairs when I heard a different sound, the low, familiar hum of the garage door opening. I spun around and bolted back downstairs, my pulse thudding in my ears. I ran to the window just in time to see Dad's sedan pulling into the driveway, Ethan laughing as he got out of the car. They were home, safe and sound. I stumbled back from the window, my legs weak with relief and confusion. The voice, it had been so clear, so real, but it couldn't have been Ethan. He had been at practice the whole time. As Dad and Ethan walked into the house chatting like nothing was wrong, I felt a wave of emotions crash over me. Relief, fear, and a deep, overwhelming sadness. I collapsed onto the floor in the hallway, tears streaming down my face. I couldn't understand what had just happened, but one thing was certain. Something had called to me from the darkness. Something that sounded just like my brother. But it wasn't him. And I knew, deep down, that I would never forget the night I heard that voice, the night I came so close to answering it. My time working as a nurse has taken me to various hospitals and facilities, each with its unique set of challenges, but none quite like the geriatric hospital where I spent just a few short weeks. It was about a 30-minute drive from my house, and having worked with older patients before, I figured it would be a familiar routine. Little did I know, this place would leave an indelible mark on me. I had only been at the hospital for a couple of weeks, and this particular night would turn out to be my second to last shift there. I was working the graveyard shift, utterly exhausted and running on fumes. My assignment was in the Alzheimer's ward, where the patients had taken a liking to me. As a young woman in my 20s, I guess I brought a bit of the outside world into their secluded existence. They saw me as a connection to the present, someone who could anchor them to reality, even if just for a moment. That night I was looking after several patients, but one in particular stood out. Lena. It was my first time caring for her, and from the moment I entered her room, she was visibly distressed. She kept telling me about voices she heard, and a man dressed in black who lingered in the corner of the room. Her roommate, another elderly woman, had requested her curtain be drawn before my shift started, probably to get some peace from Lena's constant fears. Lena was a sweet woman, despite her terror. She'd smile when I was around, but she was clearly troubled by something I couldn't see. By 11:00 p.m., most of the patients were asleep, but not Lena. She kept calling me into her room, her eyes wide with fear as she spoke of the voices and the man in black. I have to admit her descriptions were starting to get under my skin. I knew she believed what she was saying, and I did my best to comfort her. I held her hand, telling her to breathe, to relax, and reminded her that she wasn't alone. I was just a call away. Eventually, she seemed to calm down, and the next time I checked on her, she was asleep. Once the patients were asleep, the night dragged on. Time seemed to crawl, almost moving in reverse. A couple of hours later, I was in the linen room, stocking my cart. The room was small and silent, the door closed. That's why, when I heard a noise behind me, I froze. I turned around expecting to see another nurse, but there was nothing there. Dismissing it, I continued my task, but then I felt it, a hand on my shoulder. I whipped around, my heart racing, but there was nothing. No one. Yet the sensation had been so real. My mind tried to rationalize it, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I stepped into the hallway, hoping to see a colleague, but it was dead quiet, no one in sight. Shaking it off as best I could, I went back to stocking my cart. When I was finished, I turned to face the door, and that's when I saw him. A man dressed in black standing just outside the door, staring at me through the glass, smiling. My heart jumped into my throat and I screamed, collapsing to the floor in terror. The man disappeared from view, and seconds later one of my fellow nurses rushed in, alarmed by my screams. I asked her if she saw the man, but she just looked at me, confused. "What man?" she asked. "There's no one else here." We checked the ward, but there was no sign of anyone dressed in black. My screams had woken Lena, and when I went to check on her, she started talking about the voices again, and this time the screams she heard, which were mine, though she didn't know it. I asked her about the man in black, if he had been smiling. Her expression shifted. the most focused I'd seen her all night. And she asked, "How did you know?" My heart skipped a beat. Then Lena began to scream, "Get me out of here, he's coming!" The other nurses rushed in, trying to calm her down, and I was switched to a different ward for the rest of the night. But I couldn't shake the fear. I ended up going home early, completely rattled by what had happened. The next day, I texted the head nurse, letting her know that my next shift would be my last. The experience had traumatized me, and I couldn't bear the thought of being in that building again. The head nurse was understanding, but it didn't ease my mind. I've never been diagnosed with anything, never hallucinated before, but this felt different. Whether it was the result of sleep deprivation or something more sinister, I'll never know. But I hope it was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Working the night shift at a supermarket in a quiet, rural town was usually uneventful, but that night was anything but. I was the night restock worker at a store called Green Market, the largest supermarket in the area. My shift started when the store closed at 10 p.m., and I worked until about 3 a.m., making sure the shelves were fully stocked for the next day. Typically, I worked alongside another worker, either Jacob, Marcus, or Leo. But tonight, it was supposed to be just me and Jacob. I arrived at the store, unlocked the back door, and headed inside to start my shift. The inventory room was packed with boxes waiting to be shelved, so I grabbed a pallet jack and began hauling a load out to the aisles. I started in the bread and snacks aisle, rotating the stock and organizing everything. After a while, I realized I hadn't seen Jacob yet. Curious, I walked back to the storage area where we usually left our things, but there was no sign of him. The back door, which I had left propped open with a door stopper for Jacob, was now shut. I figured he must have come in, so I opened the door and saw the stopper lying outside. That was odd. It seemed like someone had kicked it out. I called Jacob, and when he answered, he sounded groggy, like I'd woken him up. He told me he wasn't coming in tonight because he was sick. My heart sank. If Jacob wasn't here, who had closed the door? Trying to shake off the unease, I returned to my task, but I couldn't help feeling like something was off. I continued stocking shelves when suddenly, a loud noise echoed from across the store. My pulse quickened. Someone had to be in here. I walked to the center aisle, the one that connected all the others, and looked down its length. There, at the far end of the store in the dairy section, I saw a man dressed in black walking past. He glanced in my direction, and my stomach dropped. I tried to stay calm, telling myself that maybe the boss had sent someone else to cover for Jacob without informing me. I started walking quickly down the center aisle, calling out, "Excuse me." But as I passed each aisle, looking to my left and right, the man was nowhere to be seen. When I reached the end of the aisle, I saw him again, standing at the far end, half hidden behind a shelf in the bread section. His face was pale and his mouth hung open as he waved me over without saying a word. A chill ran down my spine. "Who are you?" I demanded, but he disappeared behind the shelf. That was it. I was done. I wasn't being paid enough for this. I rushed outside to my car and called my boss, explaining that there was a strange man in the store. My boss told me to either get him out or call the police. I wasn't about to confront this guy on my own, so I dialed 911. I waited in my car until a police officer arrived. Together, we went back into the store, searching for the man. We found him again, standing in one of the aisles, grinning in that same eerie way. When the officer ordered him to come out, the man surprisingly complied. He was handcuffed, but he never stopped staring at me, licking his lips and smiling. His eyes were sunken, with deep bags under them. The only thing he said was that he was looking for a snack. As the officer led him outside, that menacing smile stayed plastered on his face, making my skin crawl. Even after he was gone, the memory of that grin lingered, haunting me. I went back to work, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that hung over me. And from that night on, I never left any door open again.